Um, Never quite sure if this has started or not because it cuts the beginning off. Hello, today I want to read to you from a book called The Eldritch Isle by a friend of mine and a fellow author, Michael H. Kelly. This is a book of short stories about the Isle of Man where he lives, and this one in particular, called The Passing Place, is about what we all probably know the Isle of Man for, the TT races. So, The Passing Place by Michael Kelly. The road was straight and smooth, a streak of grey that flew past beneath him. Scrubby grass on either side was a green blur, showing no differentiation. Around him was the sky, vast and towering, a pale blue emptiness marked only by faint wisps of white, too inconsequential to be called clouds. On this straight road, surrounded by the void, he sped towards his destiny. Harry Fenton was a biker. For years he had been racing motorcycles as a talented and enthusiastic amateur. He had some small sponsorship from a couple of building firms near his home in Guildford, but he financed most of his racing himself. It was an expensive business requiring travel, upkeep of bikes, and the van to transport them in. It had also cost him his marriage, after his wife had found one too many engines stripped down on their kitchen table. But it was his life, and he wouldn't change it for the world. He had been coming to the Isle of Man for the last 20 years for the annual TT races in May and June. For the last 10 years he had been racing himself, thrilling to be on a course that was all open roads, hills and dips, tearing up mountains and ripping through glens. The TT course was merciless and unforgiving. It was also the greatest buzz he had ever experienced in his life, a true test of his skills as a rider, and a real taste of freedom, almost a transcendental experience. Now Harry was powering across the mountain circuit. He had passed groups of marshals and spectators all along the way, barely registering them as they blurred past. He was approaching 200 miles per hour at one of the fastest parts of the course when the strangeness started. There were no spectators here, no other riders were in sight. He was all alone. And he was about to enter the unknown. He had been expecting it. Over the years, Harry had grown to know the other riders and many of the fans. The TT was not just a race meeting, it was a huge event in the social calendar, a time to meet old friends, to laugh and party, to celebrate their love for life and the sense of freedom they could only find on the back of a motorbike. He had become firm friends with many of his fellow riders. They came from all over the world to participate in these unique races. He had met and bonded with riders from Germany, Ireland, France, Japan and the United States, all sharing a common love for speed and thrills. This shared experience was something that joined them all together, which could never be understood by the non-initiated. Harry had bonded well with his fellows, and they would laugh and joke together at the grandstand before they raced, and they would trade stories and tips on the non-race days. They would drink together and party with a vengeance. They mourned together whenever a fellow rider was killed in an accident. Motorcycle racing was a dangerous sport, and all of them were acutely aware of their mortality. Theirs was a brotherhood which deepened with every new year, or at least it had until about 3 years ago. Perhaps some hint of wrong had crept in the year before, when one or two people looked at the others slightly askance, with strange gleams in their eyes and tight smiles on their faces. But it was 3 years ago when the weirdness really became noticeable. It all began with Ken Yamato, a Japanese rider who Harry particularly liked. He had a fine sense of humour and was always smiling. Like Harry, he hadn't a hope in hell of ever coming to actually winning one of the races. But that wasn't the point. It was the experience and the TT atmosphere that mattered. They could afford to just have fun and enjoy themselves whilst the quicker lads jostled for a podium place. One particular morning, after a clear and clean practice session, Ken Yamato had pulled up at the grandstand after his final lap, taken off his helmet, and hadn't been himself at all. His beaming smile was replaced with a strangely unsettling grin, a fixed expression that never changed. His eyes were the worst things though, gleaming and unfocused, as if they were fixed on some sight very far away, or turned inward to see things that existed only in his imagination. He didn't respond to his friend's hails, he didn't speak. He merely grinned and stared hideously, then walked slowly off, ignoring them all. Yamato was only the first. One by one, a small number of riders changed that fortnight. They still raced fluidly and quickly, but they ceased to socialise or even speak with their old fellows. They would stand apart, not even talking amongst themselves, but simply grinning blankly and hideously, while their staring eyes gleamed with a weird light, reflecting things unseen. If anyone from outside their group approached, they would simply turn and walk away, ignoring all hails or calls, grinning all the while. None of them returned the next year, nor could anyone find out what happened to them. They, and often their families too, had simply moved away and could no longer be traced. But new members continued to join the group of grinning ghouls until a fresh dozen of them departed and disappeared at the close of that year. The next year followed a similar pattern. Harry found it maddening and very frightening. He could think of no explanation, nor did the press seem to notice it. There was no outcry, no investigation into why so many world-class riders were vanishing after changing beyond recognition. It was as if they had become something different, inhuman, and only he could see the change. If he mentioned it to any of his normal compatriots, they simply looked uncomfortable and changed the subject. Only one ever gave a hint that he had noticed it too, an Italian named Fabio Sacco. He seemed frightened and nervous, relieved that Harry too had observed that something horrible was happening. But before they had chance to investigate together, Fabio Sacco had too changed during the very next race. When Harry sought him out, he grinned and stared and walked away. Harry had then developed a theory, a very, very discomforting theory. He surmised that the only people who noticed the change in others were those who were most susceptible to it themselves. So now, 3 years on, Harry knew that his number was up. A sense of oppression had been upon him all day, and just before the race started he had seen a small group of 3 riders standing there staring at him with deadly gleaming eyes, their mouths stretched impossibly wide in sinister grins. Now he rode like a demon, determined to put in the best race he possibly could, to remember himself, who he was. He would not change like they had, but he knew in his heart he was racing to his doom. And now he was alone, no marshals or spectators in sight, no other riders on this stretch of road. The void of the sky yawned all around him, hungry for his soul. He pulled back on the throttle, squeezing every last quiver of speed out of his bike. If only he could fly away from his doom right now. In one instant, one timeless break between one moment and the next, the entire world changed, and the horizon leapfrogged. Harry's eyes widened as the sky suddenly expanded to infinity, taking his consciousness with it. He felt as though he was being turned upside down, back to front and inside out. Then the cosmos retracted back to an infinitely small point. Then the moment was past, and any onlooker would have witnessed nothing. Harry's bike continued to ride on, powering along the mountain circuit just as it had done seconds earlier, without so much as a blip. But something was different. It would be no good asking Harry Fenton what had happened, though, for Harry was no longer there. Something strange and unutterably wrong moved about in his body, grinning and staring with gleaming eyes. But it was not Harry Fenton. Where Harry Fenton had got to, none could say.